With the election right around the corner and our ever-expanding network of podcasts, including our most recent edition, Still a Consciousness, there's never been a better time to become a member. In addition to no ads, members receive bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, access to our Discord community, and enhanced show notes for select shows. Our goal is to make the DSR Network membership accessible to everyone, so for the month of May, enjoy 60% off the normal monthly or annual price for the first month or first year. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code MAYDAY, one word, at checkout. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code MAYDAY. Thank you very much for your support.
9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio, coming to you direct from our super secret studio in the third sub-basement of the Ministry of Snark in Washington, D.C., and from other undisclosed locations across America and around the world.
Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the DSR podcast. Whenever the former president of the United States is convicted of multiple felonies, we have a special edition of our podcast. This has kept us from having to do this too often or ever, but we're going to do it now, and we've got a great guest, Jen Rubin of the Washington Post, and we may have another great guest, Mike Tomasky of the New Republic. Are you there, Mike?
I hope so. Am I?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Great audio. That's fantastic. We hear you. And are you there, Jen?
I am indeed.
Well, then we can have a conversation. It's just almost exactly 24 hours since Donald Trump was convicted by a jury on 34 counts. It was actually a little more complicated than that because each count was 2 counts, right? I mean, each time they agreed that he had committed a crime, they agreed that he committed a crime of falsifying records and that there was another crime involved. And it was unanimous each and every time. So that seems like kind of a big deal. And yet, Jen, somehow I look out into the punditverse, and what I keep getting back are people going, well, this won't have much effect on the election, as if they'd ever seen this happen before. Or, the Republicans are really showing how to play this by lining up with Trump, even though they're lining up against the Constitution and the rule of law in the U.S. And the Democrats, by playing this straight, they're making a big mistake. And it's just given me a headache. So could you clear this up for me, Jen? How should I be reacting?
This is the bane of our existence, the way the mainstream media covers this. And I include my own publication on the news side. I include other publications. It is maddening. And this is what has contributed to the rot in the political brain, that everything is a horse race. Everything is, well, does it matter? There's no substantive evaluation, first of all, of the historic, momentous nature of this. And secondly, as to, what this means if the electorate should put this person back in power. And it has predictably let something slide, which we have seen so many times before. We have gone from election denial to jury denial. We've gone from vilifying election workers to vilifying jurors. And just as they try to delegitimize an election, they're trying to delegitimize the entire judicial system. This is dangerous. This is reprehensible. And frankly, for lawyers, it should be disbarment territory. I went back and looked, actually, at John Eastman's disbarment. And one of the things he was disbarred with was telling known falsehoods and undermining the election when he went on Steve Bannon's show. What are all of these Republicans doing? They are saying knowing falsehoods. They are undermining any residual faith in the judicial system. And so we're back to this moral morass. And I think if they could stop for a moment with all of this whataboutism and all of this horse race kind of stuff and just look at the magnitude of the offense, the really majestic quality of what has transpired, a normal trial in a normal courtroom with 12 incredibly conscientious and frankly brave Americans, we might be in a slightly different place rather than in our usual kind of moral hall of mirrors, which I find so dispiriting and infuriating.
Yeah. So same question to you, Mike. Here was the New York Times headline I saw. At a moment of national trauma, Biden feels compelled to stay on the sidelines. While presidents typically play a pastoral role after court cases that tear at the national fabric, the incumbent was effectively conflicted out. I mean, as one person I know and like said, "Oh Lord, take me now."
Seriously. That, I mean, I saw that headline, David, about an hour ago, and I dropped my head on the desk, and I ran up the white flag. I mean, yes, when there are cases that involve big societal issues and in which that aren't expressly political, but a case about, first of all, to call this national trauma. No, this isn't national trauma. I'm sorry. This is Donald Trump's trauma and MAGA world's trauma. It's not the nation's trauma, except maybe to the extent that he's putting the rest of the nation through hell and torture. But this isn't one of those national trauma cases like the OJ case or something like this. This is a case of a man who serially lied and whom a brave jury, as Jen said quite rightly, took less than 10 hours to come out with a very emphatic verdict. So that headline was just stunning, and that kind of coverage, it's just horrible. There needs to be more coverage of, for example, I poured through some of those Republican responses this morning that Jen was referring to. Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio comparing this to Cuba, Tim Scott's outrageous comments, Susan Collins's bewildering and weird comments. Like, why did she feel the need to weigh in and make that false, just scurrilous charge about Alvin Bragg? What these people are doing, and if you read all these comments and if you think of them just in terms of like a partisan political statement, they're what we're accustomed to hearing from these Republicans. But if you think about the rule of law and the integrity of the jury system and how politicians all our lives from both parties have generally said we have to respect verdicts, and you think of these statements in that context, they're just appalling. And that deserves very harsh coverage.
Yeah, no, absolutely does. And I want to come back to that in a moment, but I got to stay sort of on the news at the moment. I don't know, Jen, did you watch Donald Trump's press conference today? Because when I watched it, my first reaction was, if anybody loved this man, they would take him by the hand, bring him into another room, put him under a blanket, get him some warm milk, because it was so demented. I mean, I was mind-boggling.
How the mainstream media gets away with never raising this man's mental and emotional health is stunning to me. He is clearly crackers, off the balance beam, in a la-la land, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, whatever you want to say. He's nuts. He's unhinged. He's crazy. And the fact that this guy, no one ever says, I think the nominee of a major party is crackers. Do you want to give this man the nuclear codes? Is appalling to me and stunning to me. So part of the difficulty is that if the media were to tell the truth, they would be taking sides, because they're not allowed to say we have one candidate who's normal and the other who's abnormal. We have one who defends the Constitution and the other who couldn't find it if his life depended upon it. That happens to be the truth, but they are incapable. It just fries their wires. They can't do that. They can't bring themselves to do it. So as a result, they lie, they misconstrue, they obfuscate, and you get this totally false impression about what's going on and what's at stake. By the way, I actually thought this is rare that, and I was worried, frankly, that Biden handled this pretty well. He did it at a weird moment because he was coming out to talk about the Middle East. But he did make a short, but I think very compelling statement that we're here to uphold the rule of law, and these are jurors just like you. And many of you have served on jurors, because this isn't kind of abstract. This is not, the system is rigged. He's essentially calling out these jurors who probably are going to have to live under, protective custody for the near future. So I thought it was actually quite compelling, quite good. And it just came in a weird context from my perspective, but otherwise pretty good. He just has to train his campaign and the White House to refer to him, even though it's, I know, repetitive. The grammarians at the Washington Post don't like it, but convicted felon. Obviously, if he's convicted, he's a felon. Felons are only people who've been convicted, but convicted felon sounds better. So convicted felons, that's what he has to refer to him every single time.
Yeah. You hear that, Mike? You're editing a publication. Every time it needs to say convicted felon. Now, I was interested also in your reaction to this press conference. Among the things that happened in this so-called press conference, he didn't take any questions. So it was really just sort of a family rant that all the networks covered in its entirety. He said that Democrats did not want people to have cars, which I thought was a little weird. There was something about Judge Merchant looking like an angel, but actually being a devil, which I thought was kind of a little weird. He went off on a tangent when he was talking about the records and said that they weren't about sheetrock, which we'll have to all agree they were not about sheetrock. And, he thought he dodged the gag order by, not mentioning Michael Cohen's name, but saying my former lawyer, who's a fixer, who's a liar, who was on the, there should have been, I am a big believer that everything should be like pop-up video or Mystery Science Theater 2000. It all needs or the Talmud. It all needs some kind of running commentary to make sense of it. But instead, we just get it presented with it.
My favorite line was the people salacious. I wasn't sure what he was getting at there. It sounds like a Carl Sandburg poem, I guess, if Carl Sandburg was really,
If Carl Sandburg wrote a poem about Stormy Daniels.
Yeah. It was incoherent. Obviously, he for a guy who says his opponent can't put two sentences together, he can't put two sentences together. He constantly interrupts himself, constantly pivots and swerves in this direction and tacks in that direction, and cuts off his thoughts. And he's impossible to follow. And then he makes these claims like Democrats don't want you to have cars, and more terrorists have come into the country in the last 2 years than, throughout all of history, and so on and so on. And it's hard to know what he's even referring to. I mean, I guess he's watching Fox, or maybe he's gone beyond Fox. Maybe he's getting these things from One American News Network or something like that. But, it's just, he's just not all there at this point. And that does need to be said, and that does need to be explored in news stories. It's completely legitimate. But Jen is right. There is a conflict in the mainstream media in objective reporting between fairness and telling the truth. And when those two are in conflict, mainstream media 97% of the time will go for fairness, which means not telling the truth.
Right. Even though we're supposed to be on the side of telling the truth.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be more important than, pretending that the two political parties are equivalent. And let's, go to that, because I think, there's a bigger picture here. And again, that hasn't really been emphasized in most of the analysis. But if you pull focus, as they say in Hollywood, you sort of pull back a little bit, here's what you see. Donald Trump attacking the rule of law in the United States and our institutions. The MAGA leadership of the GOP lining up and saying, no, I'm loyal to Trump. I'm not loyal to the Constitution, attacking institutions. You see at the very same time, Alito and Roberts saying, we're going to run this court the way we want to run this court. And it's the same thing that happened on January 6th when they stormed the Capitol and they said, we're not going to, let this country simply be run by its rules. We want it to be run by our impulses, our MAGA impulses. There is a massive, pernicious, coordinated effort to tear down American institutions as the central activity of the Republican Party. And it's the Supreme Court, it's the legislative branch, it's the executive branch, it's many states, and I will wrap this rant up here, but one of the things that struck me as real interesting, and I may write something about this, but one of the things that struck me as real interesting is if you've looked at the international news late yesterday, not only did Mike Johnson and J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis and Mitch McConnell and Susan Collins all say, these same words about the weaponization of, this, and that this was unfair and that Trump was strong and this is how we politicize our attacks. So did the Kremlin. So did Dmitry Peskov at the Kremlin. So did Viktor Orban. So did the deputy prime minister of Italy, who is the leading right-wing politician in Italy. So did Nigel Farage. In other words, the right-wing Putin coalition in Europe was reading from the same hymnal as MAGA. And they all have this one desire, which is to destroy U.S. institutions. And somehow, to me, and again, I'm crazy, that seems more important than how much yesterday's trial result moved political polls in the past 24 hours. But Jen, as you know, I'm a little off, so maybe I'm wrong.
So I take it from that you don't believe that Mrs. Alito was in a spat with her neighbors and responded by flying upside down.
Well, that there was more news on that today too. Apparently, the Alito's marshal's detail intimidated the neighbors and moved their cars in front of their houses and so forth as part of this whole thing. So,
because after all, First Amendment. Schmurst Amendment, but I do think he was trolling us, by the way, by saying that this woman has an absolute constitutional right to fly her flag. I don't have the right to tell her what to do with her flag. It was.
But while you're at it, can I have your womb, please?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, by the way, the throwing the wife under the bus thing is just such a cliche. It's like, go out to Hollywood, get a better script writer. I mean, come up with something, more inventive. That's really lame. But at any rate, your point, yes. The news needs to be run these days by historians and experts on fascism and on the history of totalitarianism, because everything is a tell. Everything is from the playbook. Everything fits the pattern, both historically and globally. And our media is incapable of either recognizing it or writing about it. And as a result, do we really have all that much surprise when the polls don't really, move, or Donald Trump operates in this kind of never world of 40% support? Can we be surprised? That's what they're told. Even people who are conscientiously following the news. Forget about those people who are on TikTok all day long. So it is a massive failure. And I think when we have leadership that is so narrow-casted in their perspective, I give you Merrick Garland, that there are not enough institutional voices to contextualize what we are going through. Biden does it sporadically, little by little. He gets ridiculed every time he does it, by the way, because who wants to talk about this democracy stuff? And didn't it look weird in Philadelphia when he was talking about democracy? But if we do not have, for example, the progressives on the court publicly speaking out to denounce this behavior, if we don't have the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, Merrick Garland, to denounce what Trump is saying and to denounce the behavior of Supreme Court justices, why should anyone else care? It's just this, everything's normal, blah, blah, blah. Don't want to offend anyone, don't want to be impolite, don't want to breach protocol. And that's why we wind up in this conundrum.
Yeah, it's like the Dems on the Senate Judiciary. Hey, let's send a memo. We're gonna send an angry.
Nasty.
Yeah, but Jen, you're so right, because I know one media mastermind who actually is trying to put it in this context, and that's Mike Tomasky over at the New Republic, who's got a great cover package in his current issue called "What American Fascism Would Look Like." So, he's making that point, and he's brought a bunch of experts together to make that point. So well done, Mike. You might want to just pick up on this and say how you got to be so smart.
Reading Jen Rubin, I guess.
Does it.
No, I mean, it was just, I'm not that smart. It was pretty obvious. He uses the language and themes of fascism in all of his rhetoric. And if it wasn't apparent in 2015 and 16, which it should have been then, but it should have been apparent after January 6th, and it should have been apparent to anybody after he started talking about vermin. Vermin is straight out of the Völkische Beobachter, straight out of the pages of the Nazi party organ. Earlier this year, I decided we were going to do a package on what American fascism would look like. And I got Ruth Ben-Ghiat, got Jason Stanley, got some of the leading historians of fascism, got other people. I think I'm very proud of it. I think it's a great package, but I'd like to see the New York Times in its way. It cannot do it as polemically as the New Republic did it in its news pages, but I'd love to see the New York Times do a series on, taking seriously what this country would look like if Trump won and Project 2025 were imposed across the various disciplines of government, across the various areas of the executive branch, and therefore across the various aspects of our daily lives. That'd be a worthy thing for the New York Times or the Washington Post to get up to. I want to add a point just a second, what Jen was saying, because I wrote a piece earlier this week saying that for this to make a difference, this verdict to make a difference politically, yeah, the media has a job to do, but also it's up to the Democrats to make a difference. And Jen said convicted felon Donald Trump earlier, and I wrote in that piece Monday, they need to say convicted felon every time they say Donald Trump. And Democrats need to make this stick. And, there are many differences between the two parties. But one I've noticed many times over the years is this. Republicans confront a situation and they go out and do some polls and the results aren't to their liking. And Republicans say, okay, how do we change these polls? 50% of the people didn't support the invasion of Iraq at first. They changed the polls. They try to change reality, as we know from back in the Bush days, that famous the reality-based community jibe that one person made. Democrats, I think, look at polls that are adverse and they say, there's nothing we can do. It's baked in and, we can't do anything. But no, change the polls. Change the polls. Make people mad about this thing. You cannot make a convicted felon the president of the United States. Talk about it. Say it and say it and say it.
Yeah, so, it does raise the question of where do we go from here? Because, I mean, one of the things, for example, that is talked about by all these Republicans in the past 24 hours is the politicization of the judiciary, the weaponization of the judiciary. And of course, it's complete nonsense. The Biden administration had nothing to do with this case. And by the way, the Biden administration Justice Department is going to begin a court case against Hunter Biden on Monday. So, that seems to be contrary to these facts. But it's June in a few hours as we record this. In days, the Supreme Court is going to come down with a weird decision on immunity that is politicized within days. If they completely reject Trump, they postponed the trial many months to help him. But they're more likely, in my estimation, to come back down and say, he will have immunity on official acts, and the court must determine what are official acts. And we send this back down to the lower court to determine what are official acts. And parenthetically, we will then invite, Trump to challenge all of those assertions, which will rise back up to us. And this thing's not going to happen for a long time. And this is politics. It's not law. It has nothing to do with the law. There's no immunity in the Constitution. This is just whole cloth nonsense. That's going to happen this month. A debate's going to happen this month. Early next month, there's going to be sentencing. 4 days after that, the Republican convention is going to convene. How do you cover times like these properly, Dan?
First of all, to Michael's point, what Republicans do is called projection. They take whatever they are doing and say Democrats are doing it. That's also a fascist technique. So if they have completely politicized the Supreme Court, to which I don't think anyone could have any doubt that at least two justices are ethically as well as intellectually corrupted.
You're being far too kind to John Roberts, but keep going.
Oh, by the way, I absolutely hold him responsible in all of these cases. In fact, I said that he was in danger of snatching the title from Justice Taney as the worst Supreme Court Chief Justice of, the United States. So we're going to have a lot of worsts. So I think the name of the game is to focus, to label, to put in context, and to work the refs in a way that the Republicans have worked the refs for years. And that is stay on the mainstream media to cover this stuff, call out bad and stupid coverage, insist that they cover the Trump that is there, not an imaginary sanitized Trump, and remind as much as we can, as many as we can, that this really is, for all the marbles. This is it. And I think Michael is very perceptive in saying each one of our branches, and you too, David, each one of our branches has been corrupted to such a great extent. You had the legislature goes tripping up to New York, presumably on the taxpayer's dime, to denounce a state court trial. What is the matter with these people? You have a Supreme Court that's completely corrupted. We haven't talked about Eileen Cannon, completely corrupted. And you're right, the corruption comes not overtly, but covertly. Judge Cannon is basically just ensure that nothing ever happens. Talk about deep freeze, talk about catch and kill. That's what she's done with that case. And that's what the Supreme Court has done. So I think you just have to call it out. You have to stop being so damn polite. You have to call it what it is. When chief justices or when presidential nominees are lying, you say they're lying. And when they are misbehaving in ways that disgrace their profession, you say it. And you try to get as many people to do that. And you try to get Americans at some point to wake up and understand that we are flirting with disaster.
Have you written something in which you said what Eileen Cannon and the Supreme Court done is actually catch and kill?
Yeah.
Because it is. And it's very good. Congratulations. I'm sorry I missed it. because that's the game that they're all.
Every once in a while, I have a whip.
Oh no! Come on, it happens all the time. As you look ahead to the next month, you've already sort of blown your shot here, Mike. You said we were a fascist state, and okay, now where do you go from there? All this stuff's going to happen. What do you anticipate, or do you? I mean, we run the risk that the public's just going to get numb.
A lot of the public is numb, and a lot of the public doesn't read any political news, and the majority of the public that does read quote unquote political news and quote unquote read gets their news from TikTok and Instagram. The most striking, this stunning poll, I'm sure you both saw it, this NBC News poll last month, that segmented respondents according to how they get their news and asked them whether they preferred Biden or Trump. People who pay no attention to political news preferred Trump 53 to 27. People who paid attention to social media preferred Trump by 4 points. People who watched some news on television preferred Biden by 8 points. And people who read actual newspapers, not the New York Times, just a newspaper, supported Biden 70 to 21. I mean, that speaks volumes, but it tells you, people who don't read the news have a vote, just like the three of us. And so, it's very hard to get word out to people like that. And when news is a 20-second TikTok video that just shows a high gas price or rubble in Gaza, if that passes for news, where are we? It's a very depressing situation. But at the New Republic, we're doing everything we can. I mean, I just often think to myself, if I wake up on November 6th and Donald Trump's president, can I say I did everything I could? Can I say that and look in the mirror and say, yes, I did? Or 20 years from now, if some historian is coming back and looking, will they read the New Republic and say, oh, well, they stood up. They said something. That's all I can do,
That's all of us can do. Everybody has a platform today. Every single listener to this podcast on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Facebook or X/Twitter or, some other platform has a bunch of followers. They can influence them. And there really is this kind of obligation to do just what you said. Your comment about the non-readers reminded me of that Gore Vidal incident where he was told half the American people read newspapers and half the American people vote. And he says, well, I certainly hope it's the same half. But of course, the problem is it's not. And that's what, gets us together into situations like this, where we try to make sense of historical things that no one ever anticipated. And that's what makes me so grateful that you, Jen, and you, Michael, could come out late on a Friday afternoon and make some sense of it as you have done. And I'm sure that it is something our listeners are grateful for. And so thank you very much, and hope you come back soon, and hope all of you come back soon after having a good weekend, because we've got 5 months or so till this election, and it's going to be a wild ride, and we will all be here for you. So until then, bye-bye.